Okay. Hey guys, good morning. It's good to have my slot this week. Um, we just had a long conversation with a Zoom expert, Talmud of ours, of course, who works in Weizmann, and he gave the entire staff about an hour and a half lesson on how to properly use Zoom. So hence, my picture probably looks a little bit better, the background, the lighting. Um, so we're trying our hardest to make these sessions worthwhile and meaningful. One of the aspects he encouraged us to is to ask all the boys to, obviously if there are exceptions, there are exceptions. We're not going to enforce anything, to turn on the video. He said it creates more of a feeling of interaction and that we're there for one another. And again, if you need to walk up, or even if you need to be doing something else while you're listening, but if I could just ask the boys who aren't video connected to please join us with video. Here's Adiv, here's Eitan. Okay. So how you the Eitan and Adiv, please, I was just mentioning before, our new policy is we're going to ask everyone to join with video. It's something we spoke about with the Zoom expert today, who really wanted us to try to create that environment. So Adiv, Eitan, Ellie and Kranz, if you guys can join video, and put it up on the chat. Thank you. Again, if you want to be working while you're doing the video, that's fine. You want to be drinking, you want to make sure the video doesn't show me that you're wearing your shorts underneath your shirt, your pajamas or something. That's fine also. The video can be head up, but this way at least we're a part of each other's experience. Okay, so Mirza Hashem, I'm going to spotlight my video, follow all the rules that he gave me. Okay, spotlight my video. Okay, so Mirza Hashem on Thursdays at 8:45. We'll spend about 15, 20 minutes discussing some Rashis. This week I'll just try to address a Rashi that Rav Lichtenstein spoke about in one of his sichot. I'll try to talk about it a little bit. Again, this is a 15, 20-minute share just to get everyone started in the morning. Okay, very interesting Rashi in Parshas Metzora. Remember, overwhelmingly, most of the Rashis in Tazria and Metzora are extremely technical. What type of colors are the tzaras, what type of animals, what type of karbanos. So there aren't that many Rashis that are more general-minded. In the beginning of Metzora, there are a few Rashis, and this is the Rashi that describes the ceremony for the Metzora to readmit himself or herself into the Jewish people, into the Machane. So the ceremony includes two birds, and I'll talk about two birds in a moment, very special, very unique, two birds. But it also includes a red ribbon, a shnei talas, an azov, a reed, and an eitz eretz, a piece of a big cedar tree. By the way, this whole process of dipping in blood and seems to be reminiscent of the iconic seminal moment in Mitzrayim where they dip the reeds into the blood and put it on the doorpost. So to the degree that, and this is not Rashi, this is my own, but I just want you to have that sensitivity to it, to the degree that Lashon Harah, if that's really the source and the cause of tzaras, which according to Chazal it is, to the degree that Lashon Harah is corrosive of morality on a personal level, but also the national fiber of a society by slandering people and spreading ill speech. So part of his reentry after sitting alone and being expelled from society is to go back to that original moment in which our society was formed in Mitzrayim, and to try to reestablish that iconic moment in Mitzrayim with the reeds and with the blood. So this isn't Rashi, but it's just something I want you to be aware of. When you read the reeds in the blood, think about the reeds in the blood in Mitzrayim and try to rebuild the society from its point of inception. Okay. But what are the reasons that there's a cedar tree, reeds, and red ribbons? So, according to Rashi, this melange of different material represents the malaise itself, what caused the malaise, Lashon Harah, as well as how you remedy. When I say malaise and remedy, I don't mean scientifically, I mean spiritually. What are the spiritual forces? What are the moral forces or the moral flaws behind Lashon Harah? And how can I correct them? So we would typically think of Lashon Harah as slander, and slander being driven. What drives you to slander someone? You dislike that person. You're jealous of that person. So it's dislike, jealousy. That's how we would associate Lashon Harah. You want to try to intentionally ruin a person's reputation in the public eyes or in the eye of an individual. You want the job, you want the promotion, so you try to slander your competitor. That person advance is stemmed, and you can advance, and you can approach and get the job or the promotion. you want to marry a certain woman, let's say, and there's another person she likes. You want that person's image to be mitigated or diminished in that woman's eyes. So we think of slander as the primary force of Lashon Hara. The truth is, there's another force of Lashon Hara. It's not just this devious, mendacious slander. It's also just gossiping. And I'm just going to go a little bit off track. The reason that he brings, Rashi says, different Rashi, an earlier Rashi, this is Parak Yud Daled, Pasuk Daled. The reason you bring birds, we're going to talk primarily about the string and about the cedar tree and about the worm, the string, the cedar tree, and the reeds. The reason that you bring birds, Rashi says, Rashi a little bit earlier, I'll just paraphrase, because birds chirp. They're just constantly moving their lips and constantly making sounds. And sometimes Lashon Hara, I'm elaborating on Rashi, isn't the type of Lashon Hara that's slanderous and that's malicious and that's libel. Sometimes we just talk too much and we just gossip too much. We don't have any negative intent and we don't have anything particularly calculating that we want to slander someone. Think about Shabbos morning during lunch. I spoke about this last night a little. Speak about the lunch table where you're just talking about Shabbos morning, the rabbi's speech, or people in shul, and just one thing leads to another. So it's about gossip, and sometimes in our world of the internet, where again we could follow sites that are intentionally driven towards spreading negative information about people. So it's just reading about people. I remember Rav Lichtenstein, and we're talking about Rav Lichtenstein as much as I can the next couple of days, because Shabbos is his yard site. So a lot of the yard site activities are commencing today. There's a Hebrew language program. I'm sure you guys know about it. And I could tell that Rav Lichtenstein was demonstrably uncomfortable when the conversation would turn to people. He just didn't like speaking about people. There's an there's an old expression that's attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the wife of FDR Roosevelt, great American president. I think it's not her quote, but it's an interesting quote. She said, "Small minds speak about people. Average minds speak about events. Large minds speak about ideas." And it's a great scale to try to make sure your conversation is content driven and is meaningful. How much of your conversation is speaking about people's lives? Well, to some degree you want to, especially if it's in a positive way, family, friends, productively, interest. How much of it is events? What happened, either historical events or events of who did what to whom and what happened? How much of your conversation is idea-based? What are the ideas we want to talk about? What are the values we believe in? What's religious values? What are the democratic values? What are the national values? What are the personal values? How much of your conversation is values? So sometimes Lashon Hara is driven by a clear intent to libel and to harm. That's probably what we would call the worst, premeditated Lashon Hara. Sometimes Lashon Hara is driven by just not controlling your tongue and just gossiping like a bird. And that's why the Metzora has to offer two birds to climb out of the situation. But then Rashi suggests a third source for Lashon Hara, and this is fascinating. Rashi says the reason we bring in 8 eras of the Metzora includes an 8 eras. I'm reading Rashi, this is now same pasuk, Yud Daled Daled. Lefi shahanigoyin bayin al gasus haruach. Because Metzora is caused by gasus haruach, arrogance. Now there are 2 ways to read this Rashi. One way to read the Rashi is that Rashi is actually uncovering a different moral basis for tzaras. We think the only crime that warrants tzaras is Lashon Hara in whatever form or variety. Turns out that Lashon Hara also afflicts people who are arrogant. And then we'd look through Tanakh and find the people who were Metzora and try to say, well, is it because they were arrogant and Metzora afflicts them? And it's obviously that Metzora would afflict them and knock them down a couple notches and highlight the frailty of the human condition, the frailty of the human body. That's one way to read Rashi, in which case there are 2 causes for Lashon Hara, the classic, for tzaras, the classic cause, Lashon Hara, whatever variety. And there's another cause called gasus haruach. What Rashi may also be intending is that there's a type of Lashon Hara that stems from gasus haruach. Lashon Hara could be the libel and the slander. You hate someone, you're jealous, you're competitive. Lashon Hara could be the simple gossip that just leads to not being careful with your tongue and speaking about people's lives. Lashon Hara can also be driven by arrogance. What type of Lashon Hara is driven by arrogance? So we're better able to understand the different forms of Lashon Harah. Sometimes if Lashon Harah becomes too criminal and too insidious, well, how many people are really guilty of the first Lashon Harah? Think to yourself, how many times in life have you actively tried to slander someone? I imagine very, very infrequently. But as we start to deconstruct different forms of Lashon Harah, it becomes a little bit more real. Oh, that could be something I'm guilty of from time to time. So the simple gossip and not being careful about what we're talking about, it just leads to Lashon Harah. That's something I think we can all identify with. What type of Lashon Harah is Rashi potentially describing in this third category? And I think the answer is cynicism. You're cynical to someone that you feel superior to. And the more superior you feel in life, and there are people that feel superior to everyone, oftentimes because they're very smart and very intellectually gifted, and that provides a false sense of superiority as if intellect counts. So it's easier for them to analyze people and to find faults. Sometimes the Lashon Harah isn't because we want to displace the other person because we're jealous or hateful. And of course, all these pathologies bleed into each other. But sometimes it's hate and jealousy, and sometimes it's loose lips and gossiping, and sometimes it's just we feel superior to people, we judge people, or we want to feel superior to people because we really feel insecure, we want to compensate, and therefore we fall into Lashon Harah. So by studying the birds and studying the cedar, we're able to appreciate what the pathology of Lashon Harah is, and this is holding up a mirror to his sin. I'm just going to take a Rabbi Liebtag style 10-second break because I forgot to take a drink and I'm very, very dry. Okay, so I'm just going to get a drink. Make believe I'm Rabbi Liebtag. Literally, my kitchen is 3 seconds away from my room. 1 second, please. Actually, I'm in yeshiva now, but I'm the Flash. So it'll take me 3 seconds to run home, get a drink, and come back, right? Because I'm in yeshiva now.
Camera's on, guys. Don't forget.
Okay, guys, I'm back. Wow, that was quick. Okay. Okay, long walk home. Okay, seriously, what else does the Metzora include as part of the ceremony? So part of the ceremony is not just inclusive of material that remind him of his sin, but of the path to remedy. And here, ironically, but not so ironically, two other elements highlight humility, each in their own way. And I want to discuss those ways. And if we better deconstruct humility, we can learn how to be humble. So sometimes when you think about these traits and you don't just mention them, and you try to identify different elements of those traits, you can more easily internalize them. So in order to break that arrogance, that's either the direct cause of Lashon Harah, of Tsaras, or is the root of a different type of Lashon Harah. So in addition to the birds and in addition to the cedar bark or the cedar branch, he takes a red ribbon as well as a zov, as well as, let me read it here. Now, a zov, which is a reed growing by the river, and the red ribbon, each in their own way exhibit humility. But what are those ways? What are the different parts of humility? How do we battle arrogance? How do we battle egocentrism? How do we battle being too infatuated with ourselves? What about the reed? Let's start with the reed. Reminds us about humility. Well, first of all, it's what I said before. It takes us back to Mitzrayim. It takes us back to the collective. It takes us back to that moment in history. Sometimes history can be humbling to know that you're part of something larger. Sometimes arrogance locks us in the present, in the moment, in our needs, in our accomplishments. And a broader historical consciousness reminds us we're part of something larger that none of us can accomplish on our own, and we're just trying to be our small part of that process. I think part of the Ezov is it evokes memories of the Agudat Ezov in Mitzrayim. So that's part of it. But obviously a large part of it is not just the symbolism of the Ezov by association, but the reeds themselves. What makes reeds a stimulant for humility. Well, obviously reeds are very low. They're not as tall as a cedar tree, but to be honest, we've all seen reeds that are quite high, depending upon the river, depending upon the water, depending upon the climate. So it's not just the height. We'll talk about height a little bit later with the red ribbon. But I think what makes reeds a gateway to humility is that reeds are very, very nondescript. They're all the same and they grow in large volume. So as opposed to other types of flora, that each have their own unique characteristics, their taste, their smell, their fruit, their shape. Reeds are basically straight stalks that grow out of the ground. Not as if the ground's growing up. It's not as if the ground is shooting up. We call them shoots sometimes. And they would just shoot up from the ground. And they're all very, very common. And you very rarely find one reed. Or we call them reeds. You're very few. In fact, some people say the Red Sea is really the Reed Sea because there's so many reeds. Because imagine this bank of Yam Suf, this bank of reeds covering entire beachfronts. And it's common, and it's not unique, and it's not special. And sometimes, as human beings, we have aspects that unite us. We're similar to one another. We have aspects that differentiate us. And we're meant to navigate that duality very, very delicately. So on the one hand, highlight our unique qualities, express our unique qualities, believe in our unique qualities, but not lose sight of how similar we are at many levels. I think at one level, to be very deeply nationally Jewish and to believe in your unique calling as a Jew, and I think we've talked about this a lot, but also to remember that we're part of a planet of other people, and we're meant to be responsible for those other people, not to be more privileged than the other people, but the privilege is in order to jumpstart our responsibility. But forget the national universal aspect. Also, in terms of how we interact in our society, do we realize that sometimes people that feel superior to others, we're trying to battle that superiority complex, they fail to realize how similar our lives really are and our needs and our strengths and our weaknesses. So thinking about a reed reminds us, well, an eighth era is this unique tree. It stands out and it shoots up to the heavens. Here, you're taking a reed and you're saying, well, I've taken this in the banks of the river, and it's pretty similar to all the other reeds that I've taken. I think another aspect about a reed, anatomically, is that its insides are hollow. That's what makes the reed have such flexibility. So and that's why some of you that probably remember using bamboo. We don't really have so many bamboo schach in Eretz Yisrael, but in Chutz La'aretz, I know you use a lot of bamboo schach. What makes bamboo, which is basically a reed, so suitable for schach? It's long, it's gidulim in haaretz, which is machshir for schach, and it's hollow. So I mean, it's really easy to carry. Imagine if you'd be using, instead of bamboo rods, you'd be using real solid wood. It'd be really difficult to cover your sukkah that way. So the middle is hollow, and that's why when you have a reed, other than bamboo is a very strong reeds, but when you just cut a reed off, it dies automatically. There's no substance to it. It's very frail, and that's why it sways. So it's very hard to find other growth of that height that can sway so easily. And it sways because it really doesn't have anything inside. It's very frail. I think it reminds us of the frailty of the human condition. I spoke about this last night in the Parsha share. A lot about human beings being frail in Parshas Tazria and Parshas Metzora, about dysfunction and about bodies that break down and about impure emissions and about less celebrated moments of the human experience that are also part of Halach, which is what I spoke about last night. And as I want to mention Rav Lichtenstein spoke about a different Rashi in Parshas Tazria. Rashi, I think I alluded to last night, that Tazria and the sequencing between Shmini and Tazria pretty much mirrors the sequencing of Sefer Bereshis. In Sefer Bereshis, man was created last. In Shmini, Tazria, Metzora, man is listed last. And not just is he listed, but his creation is listed, because the beginning of Tazria describes the birth of a baby boy. So in Shmini, the laws of the animals are listed, which animals can be consumed, which animals can't be consumed. So there's a discussion about animals. And immediately after the animals, there's the conversation about human beings, their birth, and not their death, but their decomposition. So this whole human coming after animals mirrors the process in Bereshis. Now, it's important to mirror Bereshis because Vayikra on its own is a bit of a repairing of Bereshis, but I don't have enough time to speak about that now in a larger meta, Rabbi Liebtag way. What's the relationship between the middle section of Vayikra and Maaseh Bereshis? But in a more telescopic sense, Rabbi Simlai says, and I'm going to a Rashi in the beginning of Tazria, Rabbi Simlai says that a person should notice carefully that he was created after the animals, and that his listing is delayed till after the animals in Sefer Vayikra. Why? So Rashi doesn't quote the entire Gemara or the entire Medrash, but the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, because if he gets too high and too mighty and too full of himself, you should know, afilu yitush kadamcha. That's the language of the Gemara in Sanhedrin Lamites. Even a fly, even a maggot, even a little mosquito was created before you and in many ways is superior to you. Afilu yitush kadamcha. So it's a very long Rashi, very extensive Rashi. I spoke about it a little bit on my Divrei Chizuk. If you want to sign up, if you're not from Divrei Chizuk on WhatsApp today, but it should remind us of the frailty of the human condition, of how weak we are sometimes, and I think we're all feeling that very acutely during the coronavirus. And part of life as a person and part of life as a religious person is living on those two poles. And Rav Lichtenstein in his Sikha spoke about those two poles, because on the one hand, we were created last in Bereshis. And on the other hand, there's a shout out to humanity before Ma'aseh Bereshis begins. The Spirit of Hashem was hovering on the water. So the Medrash says Ruach Elokim refers to Mashiach. And it doesn't refer to Mashiach as a person, it also refers to Mashiach as a concept. Paradigmatic man at his best, man's achievement, possibility to reach and redeem the world. So although man was physically created last, his potential in Ma'aseh Bereshis was already outlined before anything was created, because we're supposed to, on the one hand, be cognizant of our own frailty and our own weakness, and that's why we're created last. But if we're too cognizant of our own weakness and our own powerlessness, then we will enfeeble ourselves. So we also have to empower ourselves by realizing what our calling is, and Rav Lichtenstein spoke about how these two are meant to mesh in our avodas Hashem. To be aware both that we're first, ideally, we're the masters of the universe, Hashem wants us to be the apex of creation, but we're not everything we're cracked up to be, not let it get to our heads. And that's, I think, a coronavirus message, if there ever was one, to check against the giddiness and intoxication of human progress by realizing how quickly it could all come crashing down. In the words of the Gemara, afilu yitush kadamcha, even an insect can be superior to you. Well, what about if it's not just an insect that's superior to us, but even a microorganism? Not just an insect or a maggot, but a microorganism. It's a Gemara that I've thought about a lot over the last couple of days, because it's just so relevant and so resonant in our context. So to summarize so far Rashi talks about a reed. I think a reed enables humility on two fronts. Number one, because it's common, and we can become more humble by realizing the commonality of the human condition. Number two, because it's hollow, and therefore it's so frail. If you cut a piece of wood, by contrast, it will last a long time, because it's not hollow, it's full of strong material. Whereas the reed is hollow, it's just living basically from rain to rain, from water to water, which is why the reeds have to live or grow near the river, because they need a constant source of water. They can't store up the water in the ways that trees can, the ways that even other forms of growth and vegetation. Now, what about the Shni Tolas? What about the red ribbon? So here it's not clear from Rashi what aspect of this red ribbon is meant to convey humility. Is it the redness? Why would I say redness? Because the way the Torah describes redness is Shni Tolas, because their association with red was worms, and probably not just their association, but I imagine they probably also used worms or equivalent types of mollusks and other types of those animals for dye. So they actually created a red ribbon with a worm. Right? The same way we would create tcheles with a worm-like mollusk from the ocean. So when people had a red ribbon, they said, oh, that red ribbon came from a worm's blood. And a worm clearly demonstrates humility because it's low, very optically, and not just because it's low, but because it's in the dirt. And when Avram tries to reach his type of humility, he says, Anochi, Afar, Va'efer. So there's something about Afar that very powerfully suggests humility. And by holding a red string and a red ribbon, they may have wanted to evoke, the Torah halacha may want to evoke associations with Avram Avinu, one of the humblest people to live by. Didn't say Anochi, Afar, Va'efer. Not just Avram Avinu, but the whole Afar complex. So what does it mean to be humble like the dirt? What does it mean to be humble like a worm who habitates the dirt? So we say this every day in Shemona Esrei. we end our Shemona Esrei by observing or hoping the nafshi ke'afar lakol tiyeh. I hope that my neshama would be like dirt. What does it mean for your neshama to be like dirt? It means that just like dirt gets trampled upon, you also want to be trampled upon. The nafshi ke'afar lakol tiyeh. Now, you have to be very careful about how you phrase this. That could sound like a celebration of victimization. Well, let people abuse me, let people trample on me, let people hurt my feelings. There's no celebration of victimization in Yiddishkeit. And if you know people who are victims, and of course there always are in our world, we have to try to resolve it and solve it and raise it to people's attention to try to find delicate and discreet ways to terminate people's abuse. So we don't invite victimization. There's no glory in being the victim, nationally or personally. What it really means, V'nafshi, Chazal didn't have to worry about the connotations of that statement because abuse was less frequent in the days of Chazal. What this phrase means, V'nafshi Ke'afar Lakol Tiyeh, is that I'm not constantly fighting for my rights and retaliating. I allow hurt, not abuse, not trample, not sinister exploitation, but hurt and offense and unkind comments. And I'm not always looking to retaliate and to defend myself and to avenge. And I'd call it to be someone like Teflon. Our expression would be to be a Teflon person. Teflon things glance off of. So don't always, I know a lot of you are living under difficult conditions and with your parents and with your siblings. This one says something and that one says something. And how many times over the last 6-7 weeks have you had to just bite the bullet, bite your tongue, let something slide off because you knew that it's better to maintain a harmonious environment and you have nowhere to run. When you know you can run out the door, literally or figuratively, you say whatever's on your mind, and then you go on and that person goes on and some way you make it up. But now the goalposts or the sidelines are much more narrow. You don't know where to run, so we have to stay on the field. What does it take to stay on the field, to keep the game in play? So I think that when you take a Shni Tolas and you take a worm, you're thinking about that type of humility. I want to end before 9:15. I just want to, it could be that the humility of the red string is not the color and the association to a worm and the association with a far, but it's more the string aspect. Take a little string. Strings don't have any value on their own. Strings are just throwaways. But one string and another string and another string and another string, you have a garment. So it could be that the humility of the string is trying to convey a sense of collectivism. I spoke before about historical collectivism, the thing about yourself in the sweep of Jewish history and the tradition of Jewish history, but also collectivism. You live in a community. Which other people in your community are there for you? Doctors, rabbis, teachers, educators, whatever role you play. You couldn't have that rich life unless you had a collective experience, even in your family. What would it have been like for you over the last couple of weeks if you were quarantined by yourself? You'd go out of your mind. So you've had your family, you've had whatever resources your parents have been able to offer, whatever emotional resources your family's been able to enrich you with. So you're part of a collective, and you realize, well, my life is deeper as a clothing than it would be as a string. And Lashon Harah is going to tear apart the fabric, literally and figuratively, of that cloth. And I have to make sure, it's almost as if you're trying to convince yourself and seduce. I can't say this Lashon Harah for personal reasons, not just because it's morally decadent or morally deplorable, but because the collective is too important for me to take the step and to be arrogant and to speak Lashon Harah. So these are some of the, and I'll just summarize quickly and let you guys go to a morning Seder. These are some of the ideas that Rashi conveys. That the 3-part ceremony, it's really a 4-part ceremony. Birds, a cedar tree branch, reeds, and a red string are all meant to either highlight the pathology of Lashon Harah or arrogance, and to highlight the way that we can remedy it by achieving humility. The Metzora talks about arrogance either as a sin on its own to warrant saras, or a basis for one variety of Lashon Harah. The birds highlight the gossip, the little gossip that just allows you to just fall into Lashon Harah without even intending it. The reeds try to correct that through a humility that's based on the commonality of the reeds as well as the hollowness of the reeds. The red string, I think, both is associated with tolas, with a worm, anochi tolas v'lo ish, David HaMelech says, and also is associated with the string that has very little value outside of being part of the larger collective. Anyway, I don't know who I'll see before Shabbos, but I'll just unmute everyone. I wish everyone, I think also, by the way, just for everyone who's here, again, we're going to have 2, not rules, but expectations. One is that everyone should turn on the video because it would be helpful to see everyone, so that creates more of an interaction. Number 2 is we're going to try to unmute everyone, as soon as we make sure that the classroom is safe, and then have it be your responsibility to make sure there's no background noise, but at least you know you're part of the shir, you want to say something. So we're trying to learn as we go how best to use the Zoom. Again, I'd like everyone to try to be video available, but also to feel free to pipe in with comments and make it more interactive. Okay? Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you. Good job.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you, Rav Shper.
If anyone wants to
Thank you.
join the WhatsApp that I mentioned, please send me a WhatsApp and I'll put you on the list. Okay, daily WhatsApp, about 3-4 minutes of the